You know, we're all hearing about how this coronavirus is ravaging the economy. I've started 3 businesses during deep depressions, or recessions anyway, and I can tell you it is often the very best time to do it. Check this out, leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. A couple of things I wanted to get into. Back a couple of weeks ago, I talked about how I started writing, and how I went from writing poetry and short stories to articles for magazines to writing books, and how I learned how to write books. And some of the lessons that I learned from some of my very best mentors, people like, Michael Kurland and Joe Sugarman, how those things, led me to being, a New York Times bestselling author with more than 30 books in print in 17 languages, blah-de-blah-de-blah. And I got a lot of feedback on that. I got a lot of notes from people saying, thank you. I'd never realized that was, a process. Obviously, different people have different ways of writing books, and novels can be different than nonfiction books. But basically, there's, some consistent stuff, like write every day, and writers write, right? The famous quote. But anyhow, I got a lot of positive response to that, which caused me to think that maybe a second step in this of kind of, life lessons learned might be of value to you. There's a piece in the New York Times here by Amy Hamari, titled, this was over the weekend, titled, "Is a Pandemic the Right Time to Start a Business? It Just Might Be." And what Amy is identifying is that this pandemic is wiping out lots of small businesses. And, I mentioned back, I believe in the first hour of the program, this raises the question, are the ecological niches, the business niches that those small businesses represented, those small locally owned businesses, whether it's the local bodega or the local version of a 7-Eleven, or whether it's the local dry cleaning store, or whether it's the local lawyer's office, or whether it's the local travel agency, or whether it's the local burger stand, or whatever it may be. And those are the, just kind of obvious things. There's literally thousands of business categories that are far more subtle and far less obvious. Will those spaces, those equivalents of an ecological niche during an extinction, they will be occupied, right? Nature abhors a vacuum. They will be filled. Business abhors a vacuum. Will they be filled by giant companies saying, okay, we're going to move into this area too, or we're going to buy up or take over these what were smaller companies or smaller competitors in some cases? Or is a whole new set of ecological niches, as it were, or business niches being opened up, and there's a whole generation of young entrepreneurs, maybe even old entrepreneurs, saying, I could do that. If that sandwich shop just went out of business, maybe I should take over their lease. Maybe I can do something unique and build a business out of this. So I just wanted to share, Louise and I have started 7 businesses in our lives. Actually we started a bunch more than that, but most of them didn't last more than a few months. We've been serial entrepreneurs since we were first married. In fact, when we were dating, I owned a TV repair business in East Lansing, Michigan called the Electronics Joint on MAC Avenue, the corner of Abbott Road and MAC. And I had 4 employees, and Louise was my bookkeeper. And my dad, who was a bookkeeper, who learned how to do, he's really good at bookkeeping for the tool and die shop. He kept the books as well as running some of the machines. My dad taught her how to do double entry bookkeeping. And so we have literally been running businesses together for over 50 years, longer than we've been married. And so we kind of brainstormed some things about what you do when you're going to start a business. And I just wanted to share that with you for what it's worth. The first thing is find an unmet need. Every single business that I've started was because I believed that there was an unmet need out there, and that I could fill. We started an herbal tea company around the same time that Celestial Seasonings did, frankly, and that's why ultimately they ate our lunch. They outcompeted us. But at that particular moment in time, in the late 1960s, early 1970s, people were starting to discover herbal teas. And I thought, oh, we can do this. And so we built this business. And for a while, it was quite successful. We built it up to 18 employees, and it was doing well. We started a community for abused kids in New Hampshire that was based on a family model, because at the time, everything was giant and institutional. And we were doing it based on a model in Germany that I was really impressed with, where no more than 8 kids to a house. And now most of the communities for those kinds of kids around the country are following our model. Now, we weren't unique in this. Carl Menninger was doing the same thing with the Menninger Clinic in Topeka, Kansas at the time, but it was just the two of us. So we filled an unmet need. When we started the travel agency in Atlanta, I couldn't find a travel agency that was interested in taking my business. Jerry Schneiderman and I, my best friend in New York, we had a business selling electronic stuff on the back magazine of Byte magazine. It's called Langley St. Clair Instrumentation Systems. And I was going up to New York every month, and I couldn't find a travel agency that was interested in the business of a small company that had 1 or 2 employees who were flying a lot. American Express said, you've got to have 100 employees for us to care about you, or 10 regular travelers. And the small agencies all over Atlanta did vacations and cruises. So we started a travel agency specifically targeting small businesses that had fewer than 10 travelers and individual frequent flyers. And it exploded. In 3 years, it went from 0 to $6 million in business. We were on the front page of the Wall Street Journal twice, and we sold that business and made enough off selling that business that we retired to Germany for a whole year, took our 3 kids there, and put them in the public schools. And when we came back, we still had a little left over, and we used that to start an advertising agency, which again, I had promoted that travel agency with a newsletter. When we came back to Atlanta, the travel agency wanted me to help out with the newsletter that I had sold. I couldn't find an ad agency that would just do a small newsletter for a company. They wanted to do giant magazines, but not. So we started an ad agency that just did newsletters. It was called the Newsletter Factory. So number 1, find a hole in the marketplace that you have a set of skills that can fill. Number 2, ask yourself, what's my unique competitive advantage? What's my unfair competitive advantage? What's the thing that I can do that nobody else can do, or nobody else can do as well as me? And in the case of the ad agency, for example, I'm a pretty good writer. I could do the writing. I'm also a pretty good salesman. I could do the selling. I could make that kind of company happen. I knew I could make that kind of company happen. And we did. It was one of our most successful companies. And we sold it on a 7-year buyout in 1997 and moved to Vermont and just started reading books. That was our last retirement. Start small. Do not borrow an enormous amount of money. That, plan for the worst and hope for the best, right? I mean, you want to plan for the best too, but start small. We started this radio show in my living room, and that's where it lived for the first 2 or 3 years. We started it with a couple $1,000s worth of equipment that I bought mostly on eBay. And it has steadily grown over the years. Now there's probably $100,000 worth of hardware that makes this show possible. And, about a dozen people who work on our show. And, many of them part-time, but nonetheless. But we grew it. Start small. And perhaps the most important thing, super service your clients. Don't just do enough. Do better than anybody else. And hire employees who share that perspective, that every show or every product or every day is not good enough yet. If you fill your ranks of employees with people who are constantly, every single week, coming to you with suggestions about how to improve your product. Here's how we can make this front page better. Here's how we can make this show better. Here's how we can do better promotion. You will succeed. If you fill your company with people who are just getting by, just wanting a paycheck, just doing the minimal effort, you will fail. So, as a starting point.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Those are some of my suggestions for starting a business during what I think is actually an extraordinary time of opportunity.